Hello and welcome to Constituency Report on Shaw TV. Today I'm joined by Jenny Kwan, the new Democrat MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant and the critic for small business and technology. Welcome to the show today, Jenny.
Thanks, Jennifer.
So, Jenny, we are heading into quite a busy time. We've got a federal election and for British Columbians, perhaps even more interestingly, an HST referendum. What can you tell people about that?
Well, people recall on the HST, the fact is the BC Liberal government lied to British Columbians in the last election, and where they said that they weren't going to bring in the HST. Right after the election, they brought in the HST. Some 700,000 people across British Columbia signed a petition to say no to the HST. And you know what? Everybody thought they weren't going to succeed, but British Columbians' voices succeeded in calling on the government to put a referendum vote on the HST. So we have a referendum vote coming up, although Premier Clark, when she was campaigning, and shortly after, there was some indication that the HST vote was going to be maybe on June the 24th. That's now been delayed till July 22nd is the last day in which you can get your mail-in ballot. And so British Columbians will once again have a voice to determine whether or not that lie was okay, to determine that and say no, actually, and to be heard to say no to the HST through the referendum vote. The government just put out some information around that, so the details of it, as I understand, is that the mail-in ballot will be sent to your home sometime between June the 13th to the 24th. So during that period, you should receive a package from Elections BC on that. And so once you receive the package, of course, then you would have the opportunity to cast your vote. For those who've not received their package, they should phone Elections BC and contact them to make sure that you register or somehow address that issue to get the package to you. And they have up till, I believe, July the 8th to do that, to make sure that you register by 4:30 on July 8th to get your package. And then finally, once you get the package, you have to make sure that it is actually sent back to Elections BC by July the 22nd at 4:30. And that's how you're going to make your voice count. And I think this is a very, very important vote. Why I say that is that there needs to be a strong message to the BC Liberals that it is not okay for them to lie to British Columbians like the way they did in the last election. So this is your chance. This is your chance to actually send that message. I think it is also a chance to say to the government that it is not okay to shift the tax, you know, and basically the tax burden with the HST is being shifted onto you and me and just regular folks in our communities. $1.6 billion by way of its tax shift, that's a lot of money to be taken out of your pockets that you could pay for and to support your own families and your own needs. So I would say please get out to vote. Make sure that you receive that package. And you know, in that period, of course, you'll hear a lot of spin. There's no doubt about it. The government's going to call it educational information and tell you how great the HST is good for you and so on and so forth. And they've been spinning that right from day one, right? And telling you taking $1.6 billion out of your own pockets is actually good for you. But the reality is that you know the difference. You know what it means when you have to pay more for the same thing. You're not buying more with more money. In fact, you're getting same thing, but you have to pay more money to get the same thing. So you know the difference in terms of what that means for you. And also at the same time, of course, the government is going to allow unlimited third-party advertising. So you will be bombarded with advertising from big corporations and so on to tell you how great the HST is for you.
But
and
it's
again,
really good for them.
Yeah, it's really good for them, and they know it. And that's why there's going to be unlimited advertising. And so the third-party advertising from the big corporations will be out there spinning that message. And again, you need to think about what does it mean for you in your own communities, in your own family, and the very fact that for democracy, is it okay for government, for the BC Liberals to have lied to you in the 2009 election where they said they weren't going to bring in the HST and only right after the election brought in the HST? So,
I mean, just to remind people of a few things that they're paying more for now under the HST than they were when there was a PST and a GST.
Well, literally anything from, you know, a cup of coffee at your local Tim Hortons, Starbucks, or whatever the case may be, you're going to be paying you have been paying actually more for that cup of coffee. The fact is that you go out to see a movie, you're paying 7% more for that movie ticket. The fact is that when you go out and have a restaurant meal, you're paying for 7% more. In fact, in that instance, you're paying more than 7% more with the restaurant meals. Is impacting people in a significant way. The small business communities particularly are hard hit by this tax. And the service sector industries, they won't actually get that credit back. And so, in fact, it's going to cost them more to do business, and the only way that they could deal with that is to transfer it back to you. In fact, yesterday I was in my own community on Commercial Drive. I just went out to grab something to eat at lunch, and I walked by a store, and there was a family buying some stuff for their children. And of course, kids these days, they're much taller and bigger than, I guess, in my generation when I was growing up. And so the woman was buying some children's clothing, but in adult sizes for her young children, who is 13. And you know what? She had to pay the HST. Formerly, she didn't have to pay the HST for that. School supplies, you have to pay HST. And that is just not right.
So let's talk about a little bit more about like different costs that are rising under the BC Liberal government. For example, I've heard that hydro rate increases are on the way. What can you tell people about that?
Oh, the hydro rate increases is going to be a significant hit for people in families and organizations, nonprofits and so on, for small businesses and trying to make ends meet. And the fact is that we're going to be seeing a hydro rate increase somewhere to the tune of some 50% over the next 2 years. So this is significant by way of an increase into your pocketbook, into your everyday sort of operations. Nonprofits are already scratching their heads trying to figure out where they're going to address, how they're going to address this increase. Your local school board is trying to figure out how they're going to address the hydro cost increase. You and your own sort of balancing of your books and paying the bills in your own homes, your heating bills are going to be hit with this. So it's going to be a significant hit. And guess what? The BC Liberals is going to allow it. In fact, they interfere with the process to allow for this to happen. And again, the government says, I'm giving you the lowest tax ever. The reality is they're taxing you in different ways, and the hydro rate is one of them. Another area to which we all know is important to our everyday life is MSP premiums, the access to medical service. And so, of course, your MSP premiums are going to go up. It has been going up 6% each and every year since the last 2 years. And again, for small businesses, that's 6% increase in their cost. That's downloaded from the provincial government. For the school board, there's another 6% increase in cost in their operations every year that is not funded by the provincial government. When you add all this stuff up, the bottom line for people to meet these kinds of cost pressures, the fact is that you would have a tough time meeting these cost pressures. Small businesses have a tough time meeting these cost pressures. Your nonprofit organizations in your community providing services to you are having a tough time meeting these cost pressures. School boards are having a tough time in meeting these cost pressures. And these are the cost pressures that are brought to you by the BC Liberal government. So they say that they have to give tax breaks to big corporations. Who's paying for it? The fact is that you're paying for it with these kinds of increased cost pressures right out of your own pockets.
So speaking of school boards, let's talk a little bit about some of the cuts that they've had to consider making or have made because of these cost pressures that are unfunded by the government.
Oh, the pressure for the education sector has been unbelievable. And this really dates back, actually, when Christy Clark was the Minister of Education Deputy Premier. She presided over a period where she changed the funding formula that's impacting the school boards. Even those school boards with growing enrollment are having a tough time today in meeting costs, that they have run into deficit situations, even in communities like Surrey. So it's not just in communities with declining enrollment that's having a tough time in meeting these kinds of offloading of costs onto the school boards and the inequity of these funding formulas. Another example, actually, when Christy Clark was the Minister of Education, she actually closed 120 schools across the province of British Columbia. This is the reality under the Liberal government's history. And Christy Clark was the Deputy Premier at the time, Minister of Education at the time, and saw some 120 schools close across our communities in British Columbia. Most recently, in Vancouver, we actually were faced with pressures to close schools in the east side of Vancouver. My community in Vancouver, Mount Pleasant, had 2 schools on the slate that were to potentially have its doors closed. And my colleagues in East Vancouver also had that same pressure as well. And you know what? We fought it tooth and nail, and we managed to save those schools at least temporarily. Even though Christy Clark was not actually in government at that time, in this most recent round of closure, she was, of course, a broadcast host. And what was she talking about on the radio? She was saying, in fact, these schools should close, and she was advocating in support of school closures. So even though she wasn't part of that decision making, she still wanted the schools closed across the province of British Columbia. Imagine this. In my view, schools are the centers of communities. They are the community hubs that holds community together. You know, in the old days, you know, when I watch Little House on the Prairie, you know, what are the significant signature pieces in communities that gives the community its foundation? It is your local school, your local church, and your local stores, your small businesses in the local community. That is the foundational base of each community. And here we are in 2011, right? That you have the Premier Clark, advocating for school closures, closing the heart of communities. Imagine the ripple effect for you if you have a family and you have children attending that school, and that the upset that would cause you and your family directly. And imagine the communities around it. In Queen Alexandra community, we call it the Queen Alexandra community, where our school is located. That community, if that school had closed, it would have a ripple effect all the way through for those with the students that are in the school, those who have relationships with other communities, other students in other communities, has built a relationship with the students in that school, the small businesses in and around that area. Imagine you have a building that's boarded up. Imagine the crime and safety issues right in the heart of an urban center. What does that mean for you? So I would say that this is Christy Clark, the current Premier's view of family first. And I would say, whose family? I would argue that education is the center of our economy. It is the center of our communities, and we must support our educational institutions, and we must not allow for these kinds of school closures to take place. And that advocating for it needs to stop, and we need to challenge the government to fund education.
Wow, that's a great place to take a little break here. We're going to get right back to talking about our schools and our communities and how cuts are affecting them after this break. We're going to be showing some information for Jenny Kwan's community office. We'll see you in just a few moments. Welcome back to Constituency Report on Shaw TV. We're here today in the studio with Jenny Kwan, the New Democrat MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant and the critic for small business and technology and science. Welcome back to the show, Jenny.
Thanks, Jennifer.
So before the break, we were talking a bit about school closures and cost pressures facing school boards. And I know that school closures are just the tip of the iceberg. There's been other cuts that have been made to classrooms. Can you talk about some of those cuts and how they're impacting like vulnerable children in your community?
Oh, absolutely. education is so essential, and the fact is, under the BC Liberals, when Christy Clark was the Minister of Education, that began the process of changing the funding formula and underfunding, chronically underfunding our education system. We're suffering that effect even today. And the reality is this. We have lost teacher librarians, we have lost hundreds of teachers, special needs teachers, support staff in our education system. What does that mean? You might think, oh, well, you know, it's somebody's employment, maybe it doesn't mean anything to you. But what it really means to you in the classroom is that those children, your children in the classrooms, are not getting the supports that they need. They're not getting the best educational environment to learn. Imagine this, you have a special needs child that needs that one-on-one support because the need is there. And when that one-on-one support is not there, who is going to be assisting your child to learn the material, to adapt the material so that your child could absorb it? Who's going to support the rest of the children in the classroom so that everybody can develop in their own way to the best of their ability, to maximize their potential? That is the reality of the underfunding, the chronic underfunding of our education system. In fact, it was, again, the Premier was the then Minister of Education who actually changed the class size issue, actually legislated class size into our school system. And by doing that, it created larger class sizes. It created, again, the lack of support in our educational system for the children. And, you know, thank goodness, because there were advocates in our educational system that took the government to court. The BCTF actually took the government to court. And you know what? A recent decision, a landmark decision was just made that ruled that the government was unconstitutional in doing that. They were wrong in doing that. And creating this environment that is not in support of children and their learning environments. And so now we're back at the drawing board of really having to cope with this in a realistic way. And what is that realistic way? I think that the government needs to fully fund education so that the children have the learning environment that they need and deserve. The families know that their children have the best opportunities to learn and to develop in our Canadian society that we all love, in British Columbia, in the province that we all choose to live in. And so that's part of the ripple effect. And in the meantime, of course, since that court decision, your tax dollars have gone to pay for the lawyers, to pay for the court system to fight this fight, to fight for a fight that shouldn't have been there to begin with. And the BC Liberals, and I would say Premier Clark, what they need to do is to engage in a meaningful way and a respectful way with teachers, people that we entrust our children into the system, to dialogue with them and to work out the best optimal plan in going forward to support the learning environment for children.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a critical issue for families. And I know that there's another critical issue for families in your community that's been causing you a lot of concern just with the people that you have coming into your office, and that's the cost of housing and the difficulty of finding housing in your community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, we have a homelessness crisis. There is no doubt about it. In Vancouver, Mount Pleasant, we're one of the poorest neighborhoods in all of Canada. And in any day, any night, you can walk through our community and you'll see people who are homeless on the streets. And it is true, the City of Vancouver has done a lot of work under Mayor Gregor Robertson in trying to address the street homelessness issue. But the reality remains is that we have a homelessness crisis. People might be into shelters, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. Shelters are simply temporary solutions, is not a permanent home. And the provincial government, what they need to do and what they have not done is to put forward a permanent, comprehensive housing strategy that builds new affordable housing across British Columbia. We need it in my community, most definitely in Vancouver, Mount Pleasant. We need people who are in dire situations, who might be sleeping on the streets, who might be in shelters, who might be couch serving, who are in unstable, unsecure, unsafe living conditions. They need a proper home. They deserve a proper home. And in doing that, not only is it socially responsible, responsible, is actually economically viable as well. Because study upon study has already demonstrated that by doing those preventative strategies, in doing the right things, it actually will save the system more money down the road, whether it be in our healthcare system, in the criminal justice system, and so on. And the other reality is this: there are many people in our communities, in my community, who are struggling with mental illness, who are struggling with addiction issues. They need health services. They need the support in place so that they can have the opportunity to succeed in life. And most basic in all of that is a safe, secure, affordable housing. So the BC Liberals, they have canceled the permanent affordable housing program since 2002. In fact, when they first took office, again, when Premier Clark was Deputy Premier then, she launched this program with her government at the time, where they canceled 1,700 units of affordable housing. And the homelessness crisis has escalated and escalated and escalated over time. It has not been addressed properly. Just a few weeks ago, I was in my own community, in my own constituency office. I had some 40 people come in that day asking for help on the question around housing, that they were either homeless or imminently going to be homeless. I probably generate more letters than any other MLA to the Minister of Housing asking for assistance for these individuals who would otherwise find themselves on the street or who are already on the street. So we have a crisis going on. And so I asked the Premier, Premier Clark, what about those families? And are they in your formula of family first?
That's a very good question. So we're running a little bit low on time here, and I know that there's been quite a significant change in your party lately. Can you tell us a little bit about your new leader and where you see things going from here?
Well, I'm very excited. On April 17th, the New Democrats elected for the first time through a one-member, one-vote system, our new party leader, Adrian Dix. Adrian is going to put forward a clear agenda for British Columbians so that they could actually choose which premier they would elect. And I'm very confident that British Columbians will choose the New Democrats' point of view in making sure that affordability is key, in putting forward practical solutions that matter to British Columbians, to making sure that nobody's left out, that those families that I talked about who are left on the streets by Premier Clark and the BC Liberal government will be part of a formula of success in British Columbia, that there would be economic activities, that we would be there to fight against the HST, to support the small business communities, to support the restaurant and food services industries. They're so critical in our communities. I know that Adrian will be there to ensure that schools are not closed in our communities, so that the foundation of our communities are protected. Because why? I've known Adrian for more than 10 years, and when we fought those school closures, he was right there with me in our communities fighting to save our schools. And he's made that commitment that we would save our schools. He's made the commitment and actually worked alongside with New Democrats as volunteers, actually, in going out to gather the signatures. Why? Because he respects the voices of British Columbians. The BC Liberal never should have lied to British Columbians about the HST, and that voice is going to count. Your voice is going to count with Adrian Dix, and I hope to elect him as the Premier with your help.
Oh, that's great. So we are heading into another legislative session here. Are you excited about it? And how long has it been since you've been here?
Oh, it's been so long. I can't remember when the last time I was in the BC legislature. It is actually kind of ridiculous that the House has not been sitting. The People's House has not been at work. And so we're now finally going to be back at work in the BC legislature on April 27th. I'm very much looking forward to it so that we can hold the government to account, put questions to them. I have to say I am absolutely shocked, though, to hear Premier Clark say that she will not be introducing a new budget. The reality is the old budget that they introduced back in February, the first week of February, only set for 4 days, was a budget that basically was a status quo budget. And what is a status quo budget? A status quo budget means it's a do-nothing budget, that there's no new agenda items on the budget, that there's no new programs that Premier Clark's going to bring in, and, you know, maybe he'll pull what Gordon Campbell pulled in the last election. Say, you're going to do one thing and actually do another after the election. Because why else wouldn't you bring in a budget before you head off to an election?
Yeah, well, I mean, how does Ms. Clark square saying that she's the candidate for change when she's supporting a status quo budget? That's really what the that's the question here.
Well, that's because there isn't really going to be change under Premier Clark. Is really the same party, the same group of people with the same agenda that they're driving through. You know, it might have a different look to it. She might look a little bit different, and you might think that she, you know, will present some difference in terms of how they approach things under Gordon Campbell. The reality is that she was part of Gordon Campbell's government. She was deputy premier, no less. In fact, driving through some of those policies that hurt you in your communities, and so I don't think there's going to be that much change. And I'll bet you, if she says that there won't be a new budget and she's not going to table a new budget, and this is a do-nothing budget, you better bet that there's going to be program cuts that she's not telling you right now, because you cannot have the same budget and say that you can continue with all of the existing programs as they are, because inflationary costs alone is going to cause programs to, or cause areas to face cuts. That we already know. Increasing costs that this government had put onto you is going to result in cuts in programming, such as the MSP premium. How else can you explain the fact that the school boards cannot make ends meet, in spite of the fact that Premier Clark, when she was the Minister of Education, said she wants to provide stable and adequate funding to education. She has not done that when she was minister, and guess what? She's not going to do it now as premier either.
Wow, it sounds like you're really ready and raring to go and get in there and hold the Liberals accountable when the session comes here.
Well, we're ready. I am ready. I've been waiting to get back to the House. We've been, the opposition NDP, been wanting to get back to the House, to get the issues on the table, to debate the Liberals, and really answer questions that I think British Columbia deserves to get.
Thank you so much for coming here today, Jenny, and speaking with our viewers about the session to come and all the issues that are happening today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And thanks for Shaw TV for having this program on their channel, and for everyone there at home who is watching. I'm Jennifer Jones, and this is Constituency Report on Shaw TV.